Well, we appreciate everybody being here. We've got a packed room. It's probably the most packed it's been in 2 days, so I appreciate you being here for that. So before we dive in, I certainly want to introduce our gracious host, Utah Governor Spencer Cox. It's not often I get to see you 3 times in 1 week, so I hope we're not wearing out our welcome too much, so appreciate the time. But obviously, it's no coincidence that we're here in Utah this week for the first workshop for Governor Lujan Grisham's WGA Chair initiative entitled Brand West. Governor Cox has been a fierce advocate for housing in his state and where his administration is committed to a future where every Utahn has the opportunity to own a home. He speaks often about the threats posed by the price of housing and needs to build more starter homes to ensure all families have access to the American dream afforded through home ownership. Never one to shy away from ambitious goals to improve the lives of Utahns, Governor Cox has announced plans to build 35,000 starter homes by 2028. Super ambitious goal, of course. And of course, we heard earlier from Governor Cox's Senior Advisor for Housing and Innovation, Steve Waldrop, and the governor's administration has helped secure $300 million from the state's Transportation Investment Fund during last year's legislative session for new Utah Homes Investment Program, which offers new interest loans to developers to increase the supply of attainable homes across the state. So certainly we could not be more excited to have you with us here today, Governor, and I know there's a lot we can learn from Utah's efforts under your leadership to solve the housing crisis across the West. So with that, please join me in welcoming the Vice Chair of the Western Governors Association and the 18th Governor of the great state of Utah, the Honorable Spencer Cox.
Okay, well, it's great to be here with you guys. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, Jack. I know we're going to watch a couple videos here in just a second, but this is my top priority, a big deal for our state. And such a big deal that we set this audacious goal with no idea how we're going to accomplish it. And we brought on somebody, Steve Waldrop, who I hope you've all met, who is going to help us actually accomplish that goal. He's been working very hard. We have some legislators. Representative White just walked in. Thank you so much for your leadership, who get this. You've heard from the League of Cities and Towns. We're working very closely with them to help accomplish this goal. But this is the stuff, guys. I'm just telling you. I mean, this is it. When we talk about inflation and how inflation impacted the presidential race, when we talk about the future of our kids and grandkids, I just keep asking the question: are we going to be the first generation in the history of the United States to make life worse for our kids and grandkids? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. And right now, the answer appears to be yes across much of the United States. But it is a choice. It's a choice we've made as a country with a lot of decisions, made at lots of different levels, that have led us to this point where we're not building the amount of homes that we need. And I truly believe that when we talk about the American dream, this is what we're talking about. We use that kind of amorphously, achieving the American dream. I believe if you break it down at the core of the American dream, it is home ownership. If you look at the data around those who do own real property and those who don't, at the end of their lives, if you look at their net worth, what they're able to pass on to the next generation, it's stark and it's scary. And we have a generation right now that are looking around going, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how we're going to do this. I'm never going to be able to afford a home. And in Utah, we're rejecting that. As long as we have an opportunity to make different choices, we're going to make those different choices. It's not easy. If it was easy, somebody would have figured it out by now. It's the hardest work we're doing. I'm grateful to Governor Lujan Grisham for her willingness to do this. And should we watch?
Let's roll the video.
Okay. Yep. Show you a couple things that we've been working on here.
Utah's housing crisis is like a giant game of musical chairs. Prices are increasing simply because there just aren't enough homes to go around. If you can't get your hands on a good home, you're left feeling like you missed out. But there are straightforward solutions to drive down prices. Building more houses leads to affordable homes, and affordable homes help to create economic opportunity, which we can all agree is something we want for our children. See how you can help to make homes more affordable in Utah at demandmoresupply.com.
So the hope here, again, is to try to get rid of some of the NIMBYism that we're seeing out there. We want people to be demanding this of their leaders.
The majority of Utahns understand we're in a major housing crisis, but many don't want to deal with construction in their neck of the woods. It's natural to feel this way. After all, change is never easy, especially when it's close to home. But the truth is, there is room to grow, and we'll need more nearby housing options if we want to keep essential workers, our friends, and loved ones nearby. Together, we can build a future that everyone can afford. See how you can help to make homes more affordable in Utah at demandmoresupply.com.
Well, when in doubt, get child actors to deliver your message. That's impressive.
You're gonna say no to the kids?
You can't say no to the kids.
You can't say no to the kids. What are we doing out here? I like to tell people we want our kids and grandkids to live near us, not with us, in the state of Utah. That's kind of our mantra.
Well, we appreciate that, Governor. Thank you for showcasing that. So what we want to do is I certainly have a couple questions that I want to put in front of the governor, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. I know some folks have some interested, just getting your perspective on a number of items too related to this. So I first just wanted to start out just from a big picture side. So as Western governors, you're often at the forefront of addressing these critical issues facing the region. And I do want to showcase, we do have a number of other governors' staff from across our Western footprint. So if you could raise your hand, I know we've got Wyoming was here, and we got Nevada, we've got New Mexico, obviously, with Governor Lujan Grisham's office. So that's just in practice, folks wanting to hear from what Utah's doing. Yeah, right. I was going to say you might spill the beans on some things, but as part of that, at WGA, we often, we pride ourselves on creating that opportunity for you all to have that shared space to talk about these critical issues and also tackle these critical issues with unique solutions that are key to the West. So, curious what insights or strategies maybe you have gained from your Western governor partners, as well as maybe what takeaways other states should consider taking away from Utah and from your leadership.
Yeah, sure. So I love these discussions because it's in such a polarized country right now. This is one of the areas where there's true bipartisanship happening. And for some of you have been in the rooms when we've had these conversations as governors, it's almost impossible to tell who the Republicans and who the Democrats are in the room when we're talking about housing, because we're all just trying to figure this out. And so I've been very grateful for the lessons I've learned from red states and blue states. Governor Polis has been in Colorado. They've been very active in this space. I've learned from him. Governor Gianforte in Montana really led out in some big ways. I'll give you an example of a conversation we had at WGA. So I was talking actually, I'm sorry, this was at RJ, but just a couple weeks ago, but Governor Gianforte, we just came up, one of the things we're struggling with is figuring out what to do with all the secondary rentals in our state. I'm a property rights guy. I'm a big believer that we should let people do what they want to do with their property, that we should let the free market do its thing. I will also tell you that there's nothing free about the market we're talking about when it comes to housing. There are so many government decisions that make it impossible for everybody to build what they want to build, where they want to build it. And so, but we do have, there's been some numbers thrown out, about 28,000 secondary rentals in Utah. And so I like to tell people, we're in this weird time where we're turning our houses into hotels. And now we're starting to turn our hotels into houses. We need workforce housing, so we'll take a hotel and make it workforce housing, which is really weird. But this is an issue. And so as we're incentivizing here, we're building these new starter homes. We've given some authority to our local communities to deed restrict those homes to owner-occupied only, so that they can't, we don't incentivize the building of a new home and then immediately gets turned into a secondary rental and taken off the market. That's crazy to be doing that. But what he said, one of the things that they're looking at doing there is changing their tax structure a bit to significantly raise taxes on secondary rentals. Like, if you want to do that, that's fine. But you're going to pay a higher tax rate because you're adding to the burden of these communities in ways that, not just to the ways that normally like a hotel would, but again, in removing that from the ability of the community to own that home and participate in ways we want home ownership to be included. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. I do think that our approach here in Utah is something that could be useful in other states as well. People keep asking why I'm so focused on starter homes. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that's where the gap has happened over the past 20 years. It's the one thing we stopped building. There are lots of people building apartment buildings out there, and there are lots of people building kind of middle to upper end homes out there. But most states, most builders, for lots of reasons that we can get into, just stop building starter homes. We also have a problem with condominiums in Utah and a lot of Western states. That's a very detailed discussion that we can get into. We're trying to incentivize more of that. Again, we just want entry-level ownership where people can start to build equity. But one of the other reasons I've really focused on starter homes is it helps with the NIMBYism piece. There is always a little pushback when it comes to density, certainly with apartment buildings, but you can see from these ads that we're showing, there's something that resonates with people about that first home and about being able to start there. One of my favorite things to do is ask, how many of you were raised in what we would consider a starter home, 1,500 square feet, something like that, or less, or started your own families in a starter home? You mind raising your hands? Yeah, this is what happens in almost every room, and we all turned out okay. And so even though we've been able, many of us, to move up, that's part of the American dream. We remember what it was like that first time when it was yours, right? That resonates with people, and so when we're trying to do that in their neighborhoods, they're a little more open to it, and that's why I'm focused here. Not that we don't need all the other stuff, we do need all of the other stuff, but we've got to break that cycle of that mindset and that NIMBYism, and this is one way to do it.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Governor. So one more question, which is kind of dual-parted before we get to some audience questions. So yesterday we had the privilege to spend some time at Daybreak, obviously the master plan community there in South Jordan, and major shout out to Mayor Ramsey of South Jordan for being, she wears multiple hats, but tour guide, she's phenomenal. So she, if she's got a second calling after politics, that may be something she should explore. But, I'd love to hear your perspective on, Daybreak's kind of a community within a community, right? And so it really underscores the importance of the local state relationship, understanding to aspire to these goals that you have. Can you talk a little bit about the Daybreak model and how it could be, perhaps even replicated across the state, or at least variations of it?
Sure.
But then also underscore, maybe from your perspective as governor, how that state-local relationship is so critical for the partnership to advance these goals.
Yeah, so you've heard today about working together. This is, I mean, let's just be blunt, right? There is major conflict between local government and state government when it comes to this issue. In every state, everybody's dealing with this, trying to figure out the best way to do it, and so are we. And so we can't do it alone. I mean, we could, but it's going to be pretty difficult. It's much better when we have local buy-in and we're working together. And as a former mayor, that's really important to me. And so I'm grateful for the example. Mayor Ramsey is one of the good examples. I can give you some bad examples of mayors and city councils in Utah, but she's definitely one of the best examples of the way to do this. And the reason I think the Daybreak model is so important, and I do believe it can be exported, by the way, not to just kind of greenfield developments, but to existing neighborhoods as well. And what we've proven out there is that density is neutral. And I always say this, density isn't good or bad. It depends on the infrastructure. That's how you keep the quality of life high. If you put density where there's not infrastructure, the quality of life is going to decline tremendously. If you put density in the right places where the infrastructure exists, it can be a positive. And they figured that out. And the best part of it, too often when we talk about density, we think about kind of the slums of Chicago or New York, or places that we've envisioned. What this model has shown is that density is additive, but it can't all be density. You need everything. So these kind of mixed-use communities, what that allows for, and this is the part I love most, because I believe so much of the problems, and I could spend an entire hour talking about the loneliness epidemic in our country, but there's a lack of rootedness that is existing in too many places. People don't know their neighbors. And what this community allows you to do is start in a neighborhood and end in a neighborhood. You can get your first apartment there. You can get a condo, something there, get some equity, a townhome there. You can then have a single family home there. You can have a really nice mansion there, and all within the same community. And so that's how we're thinking strategically. In with this starter home initiative that we're doing, with the hundreds of millions of dollars that we're working on loans with developers to build these starter homes, we're not requiring that all of those starter homes be under $400,000. Only 60% of the development has to be under there to be able to get these loans, working with banks and the state. That's very intentional, because we don't want them to all be the same, so that when it's finally time to move, you have to move to another city or another place. We want you to be able to move up in that community. And we found, again, the data is really good. Utah leads the nation in upward mobility, which means if you start in poverty, you don't end in poverty. One of the things that the Raj Chetty research out of Harvard has shown is that in these neighborhoods where you have poor kids and rich kids together, that's the best model. Where they're going to school together, they're spending time together. It helps them look at different family structures. And so the more of that we can have, instead of segmenting people based on class, the better off everybody is going to be over time. And so that's one of the reasons that I think Daybreak is such a great model for the rest of the country.
Appreciate that. I want to open up to a few questions from the audience, and Lauren will have a mic for, especially not just for us here, but for our live stream folks. So don't be shy, or else I'll have to call on you.
Hi. So you mentioned the secondary or short-term rentals and kind of some of the impacts they have on housing. So I'm from Utah State University. We're working on an online course right now around short-term rentals for small, rural, high-amenity communities, specifically on like how to manage them. And Colorado currently allows communities, I know they're home rule, so it's a little different, but like communities can choose to create an additional short-term rental specific tax so that it ensures parity with hotels. Hotels don't have to pay for an additional impact they are not causing to the local home inventory, but short-term rentals can. They're important, they meet a market need, people love staying in them, and they do impact local housing inventories, and so it's a really interesting way to help the use pay for some of the impact it's causing, and communities can put it into a housing fund. So just wondering what the thoughts, like if Utah would ever be amenable to something similar where the use can stay, it can meet that market demand, but it can also help support affordable housing, funding, and things to augment some of the challenges that come with it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do think that that's the type of thought and model that I am interested in, and that we're having conversations about. I'm not a believer that we need to get rid of all short-term rentals. I don't want to say that, but I do think we need to find the appropriate balance and make sure that if we're going to allow for those short-term rentals, and we should, that we do it in such a way that there is fairness in the market, fairness with hotels, and also that we're not overdoing it and taking up all the supply. Again, if we were living in a perfect world where it was truly a free market and anybody could build whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, then I would have no qualms whatsoever. We don't live in that world, and I don't anticipate we're ever going to, so it doesn't make sense for me to make the argument for that, because that's never going to change. We're always going to have zoning laws. We're always going to have some sort of decision-making that takes place at the government level when it comes to building. If that's the case, then, and we have to work within an imperfect system, then we've got to figure out the best way to balance it. We went from cities could just ban them completely to saying, no, we're not going to allow that. You have to allow them. And I think that probably made the pendulum swing a little too far the other way, to where now we've lost some of that balance, especially now where we are in a housing crisis, when I'm 30,000 units short in a state where I have 28,000 secondary rentals, right? It gets kind of difficult. So this is one way to help restore a little bit of that balance. And if it means that we have a few less of these, then that's okay. But also, if we are going to have them, then then it's fair, and we're making up for some of the impacts that we're causing to those cities.
Hey, good morning. Alex Horowitz, Housing Policy Director at the Pew Charitable Trusts. Our research has found that Houston has been the most successful jurisdiction at adding starter homes through a combination of allowing homes on land that wasn't previously used for residential purposes and then shrinking minimum lot size. And once they did that, they ended up getting about 80,000 homes, mostly affordable to middle-income households, even though they weren't deed restricted. I wonder if you see that as having relevance to Utah's situation in terms of both enabling housing where there isn't currently housing on non-residential land, but also enabling homes to be closer together more in the daybreak style.
Yes, absolutely. This is something that we're very interested in. It's something that we're looking at. We're looking at it. Look, the federal government owns about 70% of Utah. We have BLM land within city limits and adjacent to city limits that would fit this model perfectly. Nevada, we heard last week, Nevada's doing some really interesting things with their BLM property. Senator Mike Lee has a bill that would help us to do that. We are looking at the state inventory of lands right now where we have property and could use that. And this is the key. Look, I'm a big fan of single family detached housing for all the reasons that we've mentioned. I think it's important, but we need smaller lot sizes, and that's exactly what we're talking about. So I suspect that I'm pretty sure that we're going to see a bill this year in the legislature here to help us with some of those state public lands to allow for that very thing to happen here. And that's one way we're going to be able to unlock some real big numbers that we desperately need. And again, we'll bring down the price of housing for everybody.
Good morning, Governor. Kevin Emerson with Utah Clean Energy. Thank you for prioritizing housing affordability here in the state. I wanted just to quickly thank you for prioritizing also bringing in federal funds to support the various initiatives across the state of Utah and across the issues here in Utah, so thank you for supporting that. Energy efficient housing is also affordable housing because it keeps utility costs low. And I'm curious if you can just talk a little bit about how the state's thinking about prioritizing efficiency in our built environment at the same time.
No, that's exactly right. And that's one of the things that we work often with our developers on, and that's happening. More and more developers are understanding that people, and more people are demanding. They want energy efficient homes so that so that they can save money on their heating and air conditioning bills. And look, this is part of our energy initiative as well. We keep getting presented with false choices that we can either have enough housing for our kids and grandkids, or we can protect the environment. And I think it's a false choice. I think we can do both of those things, and especially when it comes to water usage. That's something that we're very keen to in the West. We've been in a 20-year drought in most of the West. And so we have to be able, if we're going to grow in the state of Utah, if we are going to make it possible for our kids and grandkids to live here, we have to have more energy efficiency. So one of the things we've done specifically on the water side is, and we haven't done this before, but now we've required our cities and towns in their planning, as they're planning on expansion, they have to include water in that planning. That was never required before. So that's one step we've taken. I'm sure there's more to come. Thank you. And we have a question up here, if we could.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the successes in rural Utah housing development and what we can share with our neighbors, and conversely, what you've seen other states do well that you'd like to see more of here in Utah.
Yeah, no, look, it's interesting. We have had some successes in rural, but it's been hard. This is the first time in the history of our state that the housing crisis and housing prices have impacted rural Utah. Historically, the Wasatch Front would have these bubbles and things would happen, but rural, it was always cheap there. I come from rural Utah. Now the problem is people are selling the homes they built for $500,000 in Utah County and Salt Lake County, selling them for $1 million, and then going down and buying homes in places like Fairview, where I grew up, for $500,000, homes that were $250,000. So the price of housing has doubled there too. And so we actually are kind of struggling there in so many areas. Now we have some communities that have done a great job of this, that have understood it. Rural, it's a little harder. We don't like change. We want our kids and grandkids to live there, but we don't want to build anything. And so change is really hard in rural places. But we're starting to see this now because it's the first time that I used to say that in rural Utah all housing is affordable. And that's not true anymore. I can't say that anymore. And so we're working very closely with our rural areas as well. And this is where there is land available, though. That's the thing. The land prices are still lower. They're higher than they used to be, but they're much lower there than anywhere along the Wasatch Front. And so some of these programs that we're talking about, some of these ideas we're talking about, can really have application in rural Utah, especially for people who are working remotely. I mean, that's one of the benefits now. We used to have the reason land was so cheap in rural Utah is there were no jobs. And so, but if you can take your job with you now and live anywhere, that's a net positive. But I will just add this. This is where the secondary rental thing has become a real issue, because in so many of our rural places, they're adjacent to some of the most beautiful places on the face of the earth, right? And so if you have a second home or you want to go visit and you're by a national park or a state park, now teachers can't afford to live there, and we've got teachers driving an hour or two to get there. One thing I just want to add that we've done that is really great on some of these starter home communities that we're building, the developers have done this where they're giving first priority to first responders and teachers and veterans. And I think it's hard to say no to kids in a video. It's really hard to also say no to all of those industries that we desperately need in our communities.
So we have probably time for one final question, so I'll leave it to Lauren there. There you go.
Sorry.
So,
maybe if we go really fast.
maybe real fast. There you go.
Thank you, Governor Cox, for your leadership in this space. I'm Steve with the Nevada Housing Division. Your $300 million program, maybe it's a little premature right now, but what incentives do you see as most impactful for bringing private enterprise into that space?
Yeah, so let me tell you how this works. What we're doing is, as we talk to kind of the small and medium-sized builders who are willing to build these starter homes, one of the reasons they can't do it is they can't get funding. So if they're able to get any construction loans at all, they're 10 to 12% loans right now. So what we did was we said, look, if we were able to use this money from our treasurer's account, treasurer didn't love this, but we got him on board, and partner with banks and credit unions where we loan at 3%. If you're willing to build starter homes, $400,000 or less, 60% of the development has to be starter homes. We will give you a 3% loan to do that construction loan. And that unlocks an opportunity for these developers. They're like, this is awesome because we can make it pencil at that number at 3%. So that's what we're doing to kind of help the private market get going. They want to do it. It's just access to capital is a problem. Steve can talk to you more about those details, but we just broke ground on the first of these, and they're building 240, I think, homes. Most of them will be $400,000 or less, which, again, the median price of a home right now in Utah is $500,000. I want to get that even lower, but it's a great starting point to have those at $400,000, and they're the ones that prioritize the teachers and first responders. So really quickly, I want to give you a chance.
I was just going to ask about that teachers and first responders piece. Have we talked about a tax incentive? I mean, you're saying that they're doing it on their own, but is there any sort of incentive for them to prioritize those?
Yeah, no incentive directly. I will say that we do have a first-time home buyer incentive in Utah. We can talk about incentives. Incentives are mostly inflationary, which is why I don't like them. But what we did, which is a little different than most incentives for our first-time home buyers, is that it can only be used for new construction. So the idea there was we just want more, and so if this is going to help us get more, let's do more. We haven't done well. Actually, we have done a little bit of that, Steve, with teachers in some communities. Yeah. So, but it's certainly something that we're looking at, and it really just helps when you're before a planning commission or a city council to say we're going to prioritize that. So there is a natural incentive for developers to do that, because if we open it up first to those folks, then we're much more likely to get our project approved.
Well, Governor, I know you have been more than generous with your time, and I know you've got to get to another appointment, but just really want to thank you for obviously your leadership. I think we've got a lot of great takeaways and some good homework assignments heading into our next workshop in Bend, Oregon next month as part of the Brand West initiative. But clearly Utah has been out front. It's been as a result of your leadership and the partnerships that you've built across the state. So just really appreciate your hospitality in the great state, especially during such a busy time heading into the holiday season.
No, thank you,
But-
Jack. Look, you guys are on the side of angels. There's nothing more important right now than what you're doing. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Tell your governors this is the highest priority. Keep it that way. This is the good stuff. This is the stuff that will pay off. This is legacy stuff. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the homes you built. I just really quickly. I know we're over time, but I went back to a community where my wife's mom grew up. Her grandma passed away about 14 years ago. These were all homes. They're small homes. They were all built in these neighborhoods right after World War II. Her grandma and grandpa, her grandpa came home from the war. They all built these things. They all look the same. It's not the most beautiful neighborhood in the world. When we would go there for Thanksgiving, there were just old people everywhere. It was, it was one of those neighborhoods. I went back there last year, and I had to drive so slow. There were kids everywhere. It was so cool to see that neighborhood alive again. And but it's because those were the only houses available, right? Nobody's building those types of houses anymore. And so I just got so excited because this is the work that will change lives. More than anything else we do in government work, this is the stuff that can pay off for a long, long, long time to come. So anyway, thanks for doing it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for leadership. Governor Cox, everybody.